Hello, greetings. Welcome to Attaining the Second Cognition. This is Doug Michael. My website is www.dougmichaeltruth.com. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, for spending time with me, and it's great to be spending some time with you again. Huge shout out and thank you to all my new subscribers. You will most likely always find thought-provoking and controversial information here. Throughout the course of our lives, we each take on different beliefs and different perceptions, most of which are governed through cultural indoctrination in order to make us fit into the mold of our individual cultures. All of this indoctrination leads us each to develop certain filters through which we perceive and analyze our perception of reality. And that leads us to the topic of this discussion, ladies and gentlemen, which is perceptual filters and the five-sense illusion. Everyone embarks on the road to cognitive advancement from the starting point of the ego program ruling our lives. Over the course of these video presentations in the last 2 months or more, we've tried to provide the listener with the understanding about the nature of the ego program and how it controls all of our perceptions. Now, perception is defined as the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. The normal limits to human perception. The state of being or process of becoming aware of something through the senses. A way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something, a mental impression. What each aspect of these definitions take into their framework is the normal limits to human perception, generally defined by the 5 primary senses. Wikipedia expands on this explanation and explains that perception is the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information in order to represent and understand the environment. All perception involves signals in the nervous system, which in turn result from physical or chemical stimulation of the sense organs. For example, vision involves light striking the retina of the eye. Smell is mediated by odor molecules, and hearing involves pressure waves. Perception is not the passive receipt of these signals, but is shaped by learning, memory, expectation, and attention. Here again, we are dealing with strictly materialist sensations of the primary 5 senses, but what is important is how we each take the varied sensory input with which we are confronted and how we interpret and sort that information to make it fit into our perception of reality. As the Wikipedia definition notes, our perception is shaped by learning, memory, expectation, and attention. Through our indoctrinational processes into the world controlled by the egos of our parents and our cultures, which include the educational systems, we learn what reality is. Through reinforcement of our cultures, we develop the memory of what these definitions we have adopted to define that perception of reality should mean to us. Based on this learning and memory, we then develop expectations over how those perceptions of reality should function within those memories and learned indoctrinational processes. This, then, is our perceptual world and how we choose to navigate that world based on these factors. When we encounter anything that goes beyond this perceptual sensory information, we become frightened when we find anything that doesn't fit into that well-defined perception of reality. This is particularly exemplified when we are confronted with any type of paranormal encounter or if we experience anything that goes beyond our primary 5 senses. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the range of the 5 senses is very narrow and extremely limited. That range exists within a very small bandwidth on the frequency spectrum. How naive is it to assume that everything that exists does so within the narrow confines of 5-sense reality? We're conditioned to believe that the material world is all that exists simply because that is what can be perceived by the tiny range of the 5 senses. Think of all that exists that cannot be perceived by the 5 senses. Prior to the invention of the microscope, the entire living invisible microbial world was unknown, so therefore it didn't exist. In that time frame, around 1590, if I were to suggest that an entire world of life existed beneath the senses, I most likely would have been eviscerated or burned alive as a heretic. Along came a relatively simple invention, the microscope, and revealed an entire world of microbial life that remained invisible to humans prior to its invention, hence the perception expanded. Who's to say that there does not exist a world of life above the 5 senses, a macrobial world? Don Juan tried to teach about the existence of this reality above the five senses, and the theosophical mouthpieces channel entities from this higher perceptual reality. The intelligent life that inhabits this macrobial world is what Don Juan called the inorganics. Take, for instance, infrared light. We cannot perceive it with our senses, but it does exist, and it's the same with dog whistles. Humans cannot hear the high pitch of the dog whistle because it's outside of our audible hearing range, but dogs, whose hearing is far more sensitive, can perceive the whistle. So the point is, ladies and gentlemen, just because the five senses can't perceive something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Prior to the New Age and the introduction to the concepts of energy work, if one were to experience energetic sensations, depending on their own personal perceptual definitions, they might consider such experiences as the work of the devil or Satan. Such an impression is solely based on indoctrinated and learned perceptions that define one's view of the world, and the conclusions reached in such a circumstance are always interpreted through one's individual filter of beliefs. Although such an experience has nothing to do with devil worship or Satan, the interpretive filter assigns this definition to try and make some sense out of a sensation that goes beyond the normal realm of the primary five senses. In like kind, in the modern spiritual arena, we find many people who are experiencing such beyond five sense energies, and their own interpretive filters assign value judgments and interpretations of these occurrences, which are interpreted through their own perceptual filters and beliefs. Let's take an example of someone who is just living a normal life and they start experiencing surges of energy for reasons that are totally unknown to them. This happened to me years ago when I first started to awaken to the understanding that the world was not what I thought it was. I would have a sudden insight or realization accompanied with a tingling at the crown of my head or in my throat, and I didn't know what to make of it at the time. The person experiencing these phenomena has not looked into modern spiritual teachings at all and may in fact be highly religious. The individual becomes frightened at the experience, and the first conclusion is that they are going crazy, so they seek out a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help explain to them what is occurring when they experience these foreign sensations that go beyond the definitions of their perceived five-sense reality. Naturally, this situation is experiential in nature, and this person can't share the experience to the psychologist, so the psychologist has no explanation to offer this person, and they usually get hustled out the door with one prescription or another to quiet their anxieties over the experience in hope that these drugs will return them to the normalcy of the five-sense world. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the core of modern psychology, making an individual feel normal again within their five-sense cultural norms. And if this sense of being normal can only be attained by drugging the client with anti-anxiety drugs or, SSRI antidepressants or whatever other drugs they may prescribe, the psychologist's job is done. In such a scenario, which occurs day in and day out all around the world, when people who are having these energetic experiences without any knowledge of New Age energy work encounter these situations, they often visit with psychologists or psychiatrists worldwide. The practice of transpersonal psychology defines such experiences as a spiritual emergency, so that particular branch of fringe psychology is at least acknowledging the fact that these things do occur, but they are hardly better prepared to offer explanations about the experiences, than their mainstream counterparts are. As with every other kind of perceptual filtering, modern spiritualism, including transpersonal psychology, relies on ancient religious traditions folded into Madame Blavatsky's theosophy. Most of these spiritual beliefs are simply ancient Hindu, Buddhist, and mystical belief systems, and seeking the divine is present in all of them since the advent of theosophy, which is nothing but a doctrine to syncretize all of the world's religious and mystical traditions under one catch-all banner. Theosophy is the framework for the New World religion, and its modern manifestations are joined at the hip with Fabian socialism, which seeks to manipulate the masses through crowd psychology and herd them into a collectivist hive mind. Just about everything in the New Age arena is tainted with the stink of Fabian theosophy. If a person does darken the doorway of a transpersonal psychologist, provided they even know this fringe branch of psychology even exists, they get their heads filled with ideas about divine pursuits, and the transpersonal psychologist takes on the role of the spiritual guru or theosophical doctrinaire, peddling their own beliefs in the perennial philosophy of New Age doctrines, again based heavily on theosophy with a heavy Fabian agenda. Here is where we encounter the major issue of perceptual filtering and interpretation. The inorganic beings, the ascended masters of theosophy, knew full well that the ground crew would start working on this planet, and they knew that energy work was going to be a process used for their advancement. So what they had to do was come up with a plan to ensure that the ground crew never got any valid information about energetic advancement. In order to achieve this goal of misdirection, the inorganics and their earthly consortium henchmen knew that all they had to do to misdirect and handicap the ground crew was control their perceptions to keep them from ever waking up and realizing their full potential, hence the creation of the cul-de-sac called the New Age movement. They knew one of the major factors in this cognitive war was going to be through energetic means, so the inorganics created Reiki energy to serve as a distraction from any other type of energetic awakening. Through these fabricated energies, they knew they would be able to lure the ground crew into their clutches if they ever had energetic experiences of their own, and started seeking explanations about what these energetic experiences might actually mean. So they created this fake energy, and they created all the doctrines and teachings about the energy they had manufactured, so anyone who had such energetic experiences would buy into their doctrinal bullshit. By adopting these doctrines, the inorganics and their earthly henchmen have effectively set up a form of perceptual filtering. Reiki was developed by Mikao Usui, a Japanese Buddhist-trained mystic of sorts. Following the advice of his Zen master, he fasted and meditated on a mountain for 3 weeks. He claimed that on the last day of his fast he felt a great, quote, Reiki over his head, meaning the wisdom and knowledge of all the universe, as if any human mired in the first cognition world could attain all the knowledge of the universe. Reiki translated as atmosphere of the divine. Allegedly, Usui acquired a healing ability after his fast and his meditation. It is claimed that Usui healed his wife and that he made Reiki freely available to all the people. Of course, Theosophy and the New Age circus has turned it into a multi-million-dollar moneymaker in which, for a price, anyone can be attuned and become a master and heal others. You can bet your bottom dollar that anything that Theosophy gets its hands on becomes tainted and convoluted. Through the control of the media outlets in print and otherwise, the market has been flooded with all of this love and light bullshit formulated by Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, and their Fabian co-conspirators, so that no matter where one looks for answers, all they find is contrived, inorganic, theosophical disinformation. This is the cost of looking outside of oneself instead of within. Misdirection. This network of disinformation created cognitive barriers of belief, no different than any other form of mind control. Given this framework, then, let's analyze what is taking place and how it has so effectively handicapped many of the ground crew members. Now, anytime I hear the term ascended master, I cringe. Look at what Theosophy and its proponents encourage: dependency on some external master. Now, if you are not your own master, you will be corralled and ruled over. This ascended master bullshit places another consciousness above the individual. After all, they're the masters and you're just the lowly human earthling. If any of these so-called ascended masters incarnated here, they'd be just as ensnared by first cognition as anyone else. If these masters have ascended, then why are they talking to first cognition stooges that promote collectivism? Don't they have anything better to do? Sure, they're masters of deception. If one adopts the idea of ascension, and many do, as put forth by Madame Blavatsky and her Tibetan ascended master buddy Kut Humi, then when they are confronted with these energy experiences, the individual who believes this escapist ascension doctrine automatically interprets these energetic experiences as being part of the bullshit ascension process. Their belief in the doctrine sets up a cognitive perceptual filter, of belief through which all of these experiences are translated and interpreted into the first cognition world of the ego program. The same thing happens with the perceptual filter with Reiki energy. The perceptual filters we all use are established and maintained by our world perception, and these filters are governed by our beliefs, whatever those beliefs may be. Christians filter their spiritual information through a Christian set of filters. Muslims use their religious belief to establish their perceptual filters, and this follows through every perceptual filter established to control the consciousness of every human operating in the first cognition through the hands of those who control our perceptions by what we are allowed to know and what we are not. If one is a political conservative, then they have the filters of their conservative belief. The same stands true with Marxists, Fabian socialists, capitalists, and the list goes on. The school of psychology, governed and controlled in its formative state through the Frankfurt School, which was an offshoot creation of the Bavarian Illuminati and with which Sigmund Freud was intimately associated, as well as a multitude of Fabian socialists, has been specifically abused to control the perceptions of the masses. Through the advent of motion pictures and eventually television, the control of perceptions became that much easier as the consortium was able to get people addicted to the idiot box and spew their psychological propaganda across the world. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called mind control. The consortium psychological controllers know that all they have to do to control your mind is control your perceptions of reality, and they dictate the boundaries of that perceived reality at every turn. Through psychological manipulation, they control the left and they control the right, and no matter which way you lean, no matter what you believe, they're in control of your perceptions. Now, you may have heard me say this before in some of my other works, but I'll repeat it here. I contend that there is a constant attack upon your essence, upon that which makes you human. It oozes through the cracks of culture, and it weaves its web around the consciousness, the very soul of humanity. Its insidious and sordid machinations wind its way through the psyche on levels so deep and intense that you cannot even see it. Through accepting any of their first cognition religious beliefs or political ideologies, they establish the filters in your mind which make the ultimate determination of how you perceive the world. They don't have to tell you what to think. All they have to do is control the options you think you have, and your own perceptual filters will do the rest of the job for them, because they're the ones who set up the perceptual boundaries in the first place. They create the illusion of choice, such as Democrat or Republican, meanwhile controlling both sides. These perceptions of reality have been shoved down our throats for at least 6,000 years, and the only thing that changes is how the consortium Phoenix alters with the times and the cultures they invade. They control our perceptual filters by controlling the ideological spin on any given subject. If someone comes up with an idea that they feel is a threat to their control, they simply steal the idea and put their own spin on it to hijack it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what the consortium does. They are infiltrators. They are hijackers. Many human beings have gone against the consortium Phoenix. People like Nikola Tesla, who went up against the theosophist Thomas Edison. Tesla's ideas on alternating current beat out Edison's idea of direct current, but it is Edison and his light bulb that is glorified in the history books, certainly not Tesla. The consortium takes care of their own, elevating those in their own ranks to the positions of authority and praise, assuring their own members are held up as the public heroes and inventors, and also ensuring that their servants will be placed into decision-making positions to advance their agenda and to promote their philosophies. This is how they control your perceptions and how they establish your perceptual filters, through what they indoctrinate you with in schools and what they preach through their religious and spiritual doctrines. This is also called psychological programming, and it has been passed on from generation to generation and will be until such time as we can break the programming and start to perceive the world in a fashion they do not dictate. When we talk about the perceptual world of illusion adopted by the ego program, this is exactly what we are trying to awaken my listeners to. The reality you have been indoctrinated to believe is real is governed by all of these perceptual manipulations. By controlling the perception and therefore creating the perceptual filters, they control humanity without ever knowing that they're being controlled. The masses simply accept it, never even realizing that there is something outside of those perceptual boxes. With the increase of energetic experiences, those who just plain don't panic out of ignorance of the process and go see a psychologist, the rest are left to interpret these experiences through their own New Age or other esoteric belief filters. Each of these filters is designed so the ego program can find something with which it can identify and ultimately defend as part of its own perceptual reality. It doesn't matter if one adopts the atheist notions that we live and we die and we simply become worm food, or we believe that we get our ticket on the boat to heaven or fifth dimensional ascension land. The perceptual filters are how the ego translates its world into its boxes of cognitive inventory. Because the ego is so authority-oriented, it rarely comes up with any ideas on its own to explain the inexplicable, but instead choose from a multiple choice list of predetermined perceptual options called beliefs. When you accept these beliefs, everything you experience is translated through the filter of these beliefs, and any conclusions you may arrive at are already poisoned by the ideas of the authorities you accept. These perceptual beliefs, ladies and gentlemen, are the cognitive boxes into which every ego fits and defines its world perception. The world and perceptions of the first cognition are extremely infantile, and this mindset is catered to and encouraged at every turn. Even when you begin to remove yourself from the perceptual filters of the first cognition and consortium control, the ego habits of those perceptual filters remain in place until you can go within, recognize them for what they are, and remove them. One of the most common perceptual filters that we have is the perceptual filter of experience. We experience things in a certain manner, and our pre-existing perceptual filters are what defines the experience for us. If we encounter something new, we use our perceptual filters of similarity to define the new experience before it is stored in our perceptual filter box. Whether we have a bad experience and put that memory in the bad memory perceptual filter box, or a good experience and put that in the good memory perceptual filter box, it doesn't really matter. All of these experiences are being measured against our pre-existing perceptions and put into a pre-existing box. That, my friends, is what the ego does. It seeks to chronicle, categorize, and inventory by placing things into tiny, neat little perceptual boxes. When we have experiences that go beyond the defined perceptions of normal reality, few of us have the wisdom to analyze what the information or experiences might actually mean without running to some authority or another to explain to us what we should think and perceive. This is how we allow our consciousness to be controlled by the invisible controllers of the consortium. This is why we are trying to apprise my listeners with these concepts so that they can transcend these perceptual limitations and finally realize how this system controls their consciousness. This is why we can say with absolute confidence that in the first cognition, you live in a world of illusion, a simulacrum. With this presentation, hopefully you'll get a firmer grasp of what we mean when we tell you this. This is another layer we are providing with these videos for you to start analyzing your thought processes and what goes on in your head on your path to higher cognition. What is being shared in this video is just a minute point of how we have been controlled. For an exercise on something to contemplate, start looking at your experiences when you have them, good or bad, and look at the process that goes on internally in trying to see how your pre-existing filters govern your perception of your experience. In like kind, also look at your past experiences and look at how information, or lack thereof, and your pre-existing perceptions have governed your perception of those experiences. It is only in analyzing how you came to your perceptions that you can expand your conscious awareness and your perceptive capabilities. For anyone who doubts this form of psychological perceptual manipulation, I invite my listeners to read a small book written by one of the controllers themselves, now that you are armed with the information in this video. As much as I hate to put any more money in the pockets of the controllers, I advise my readers to invest a few bucks and read the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays, who was Sigmund Freud's nephew and one who was eyeball deep in the Fabian agenda using crowd psychology to control the perceptions of humanity. If, after reading that book and listening to this video presentation, you can still deny that your perceptual world is governed by others, then you need to go back to grade school because you just ain't getting it. With all of the information in this presentation now in hand, then my listeners should appreciate why we produced the video on why eroding beliefs is important. It is through this cognitive erosion process that we each remove these perceptual filters that keep our consciousness bound in the limited realm of first cognition thinking. As these filters are slowly removed by letting these beliefs go, our individual perception expands beyond those limiting perceptual boxes and our cognitive capabilities advance. One truly begins to see the world in a different light and their awareness expands. It takes a lot of erosion before we really see the progress of this expanding awareness, and that is the hidden part of the growth process that we miss along the road to the second cognition. As I've stated time and again, the process that leads to cognitive advancement is a destructive one. It's a matter of deconstruction, of letting go, not so much acquisition of new things, and it requires patience. One other thing I'd like to mention regarding perception: many people listening to these presentations assume that I am solely responsible for all of the material presented. It used to be that way, but this has evolved into a collaborative effort, and I'm thrilled to be working with others who are, on the same page, as it were. It's not just Endall and I, but several others as well. Mrs. Beall contributes her insights, and our friend in the UK does as well. I am the voice behind the messages, but again, I am not the only contributor, but folks may perceive that I am. Red Hawk contributes his beautiful mandala artwork, and Rob Mirage offers his astounding photography. What we are is a handful of people dedicated to advancing our own perceptual awareness and offering our insights to others in the hopes that it can offer some assistance in their own personal growth. I used to do this all by myself, but it is so nice to have others to work with who are on the same page and who wish to see an end to tyranny in all of its rotten forms. Some of the presentations are written solely by me, others by Endall, and still others are a collaborative effort, but it doesn't really matter. It's the message that's important. I'm simply the voice behind the message. We have a tendency to stay focused on releasing ourselves from these limits to our perceptual awareness, never realizing that as we remove these filters, our inner consciousness is expanding when those perceptual roadblocks are removed. This expansion is not immediately evident, but it is taking place all the same. So even as you are deconstructing the ego perceptual illusion, you are growing at the same time. You just aren't consciously aware of the growth taking place while it is in progress. However, hindsight is 20/20, and looking back at how you may have perceived things even a short time ago, compared with where your perceptions are now, can be very revealing and can act as confirmation for your own growth. Take heart and be patient and gentle with yourself. This is an ongoing process. Ladies and gentlemen, I extend my gratitude and my heartfelt thanks to any and to all who take the time to open their mind, search for the truth, and to push forward in their own cognitive advancement. Thank you very much for taking your time to listen to Attaining the Second Cognition. This is Doug Michael, and until next time, walk in peace.